Tempo quite a lot on the market side. Quite interesting to see the key indices, the main indices for the Nigerian stock market, the stock exchange, below the threshold for the All-Share Index and for the equity cap. Now we're nearly 16% negative index return since 2019 started. Not quite a stellar year, and we're now starting the final quarter, the final 3 months of the year, so to speak. But the market has to move on, as we all know. A market goes down and it goes up, so folks get prepared for it when you invest in the market. That's what investment is all about. It's different from savings. But a part of what the Nigerian Stock Exchange has been doing over the last few years is to try to make sure that our own stock exchange becomes more global and international in nature. So we've seen relationships with the London Stock Exchange locked, and in the last few years, we've seen relationship with the NASDAQ. Now the latest is with the Luxembourg Stock Exchange.
Correct, boss. And yes, that's why we've got the head of business development here with us. Thanks a great deal for joining us this morning, sir.
Thank you.
So here's a deal that you've just signed with Luxembourg Stock Exchange. Of all the stock exchanges in the world, why Luxembourg? Because we know that that's a very, very small European country.
Okay, so in terms of sustainable financial securities, the Luxembourg Stock Exchange actually is the leading exchange. As a matter of fact, it's the first exchange to have a dedicated platform for the issuance, trading of sustainable financial securities. It has a very huge followership. It has over 29,000 securities on the bond side that are listed by 3,000 issuers from over 100 countries. So it's a huge platform for trading, listing financial securities on the sustainable side.
So it says we're going to be seeing some kind of cross-listing initiatives here and there. Talk us through that.
Okay, so what this MOU guarantees us to a large extent is that it will give visibility first to our local domestic issuers who will be issuing green bonds. It will also allow domestic investors to have access to a wider pool of such sustainable securities, because it has a large market. As a matter of fact, the Luxembourg Stock Exchange does have about 50% market share of all sustainable financial securities in the world. So it's a very huge platform, and we feel to a large extent that this will help deepen our market and will also help the domestic issuers to gain a lot more investors on the international side. So we expect a lot more domestic companies to begin to issue green bonds on the back of this MOU.
So now that we're beginning to take green bonds more seriously in the Nigerian market here, how much of representation does that have in the NSE, so to say?
Okay, at the NSE, we're a member of the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative. What that means is that we're committed to creating the hub for green bond issuance in Nigeria. And it's not just the green bond, but also other exchange-traded products around the green bonds, like the ETFs. So we expect now to begin to attract more issuers and, to a large extent, more investors to begin to take advantage of this pool that we've just created. And the stock exchange remains committed to creating the platform and also providing leadership in terms of market development, in terms of domestic training and awareness, capacity building, just to ensure that this green bond and sustainable finance will continue to lead. And you know that the conversation right now is around sustainability. So it's a huge platform, and we're really excited that we were able to sign the MOU.
Okay, I'm wondering what's the composition of green bonds in the market cap and, of course, the indices of the exchanges at this point?
The way it is at this particular time is not that bogus. We do have the sovereigns that it's just Nigeria that has issued, and we do have two other companies that have issued. So Nigeria, the first green bond that was issued was a 10.96 billion naira issuance that was a 5-year bond, and it cleared at 13.48%. Recently, the FGN has also issued one. It's a 15 billion naira bond, and it cleared at It cleared at 14.5, which will be listed on Monday. We have a few corporates that have also issued, so it's growing. Access Bank issued a 15 billion bond, and it cleared at 15.5. That was also a 5-year bond. Okay. Northside Power also issued a 15-year bond, which cleared at 15.6, and it was 8.5 billion naira that was raised. So with this MOU, these issuers are going to have they're going to have access to a lot more institutional investors that will be investing in these bonds, which means we're likely to see more issuances, larger figures, to be able to take advantage of the emerging trend. The other element that it brings also is liquidity. These current ones that are issued in the market, we haven't seen a lot of liquidity, obviously, because the investors that hold these instruments want to hold to maturity because we don't have a lot of them that have been issued. So with this access, with MOU, it will grant them access to a much larger pool, and we'll begin to see a lot more liquidity and trading around these green bonds.
So with the MOU, are we also likely to see some of the already listed ones locally listed now or cross-listed now on Luxembourg Stock Exchange?
Exactly. To give them an opportunity to do that, should they decide to do that, or should they decide to raise more on new bonds. The cross-border listing initiative obviously will, because of this MOU, it will allow for a seamless transaction to occur across both borders. So it's huge. So our local issuers will begin now to have international coverage to a large extent, and there are some dedicated international investors which this MOU provides a gateway to the Nigerian market to take advantage of those international investors looking to invest in such sustainable financial securities. A case in point is the European Investment Bank that is committed to buying green bonds issued by banks. So we expect more banks actually in the domestic market to begin to issue bonds around on the back of this MOU, so that they can take advantage of a larger pool of investor base to raise whatever it is that they want to raise in the market.
So you actually hinted earlier that locally there hasn't been so much of liquidity. This is expected to create exposure around all of this, and that will create activities around the ones that are listed. So how much of awareness is being created to sensitize the local investors and perhaps some international investors, because green bond we know generally is not something well known even outside there. So how much of awareness is the NSE coming up with to sensitize investors about green bonds and how they can participate more on the secondary markets?
All right, thank you. So, we have the X Academy, which is our knowledge platform, and they've been very active in this space in terms of providing building market capacity, trainings, specialized trainings around green bonds, not just for the issuers, also for the investors. They need to start thinking about sustainability in terms of how they make their portfolio decisions. And so we're very active in that space, and we'll continue to be dominant as we now begin to leverage international access to have access to best practices and ensure that the knowledge base required for the establishment of this platform will continue to thrive.
Okay, so I know that those that actually buy or sell, basically enter and exit on green bonds, the secondary side of it and even the primary are more of institutional corporate investors. Are there plans to engage the retail investors too?
Exactly, so which is part of the market development strategy of the exchange. So today we have exchange traded products. As you know, we're a multi-asset stock exchange, so it's not just bonds. We also trade equities, we trade ETFs, and on the back of this, we expect to create more instruments, especially around exchange-traded products, and we expect the retail participation to increase. Currently, we don't have a lot of that, but because of this MOU, we'll be able to issue not just in the domestic market, but also these investors will begin to have access to such instruments that are issued offshore as well.
Let me ask you this on a final note. How involved are the regulators, the quasi-regulators, UNSRO, quasi-regulators like the DMO, the SEC in this MOU?
Obviously, the MOU is between the Nigerian Stock Exchange and the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, but you do know that we're committed as a responsible organization to always be in line with market regulation. So the SEC does have rules around green bonds, which is the reason why were able to list not just on the sovereign side, but also on the corporate side. So the rules for listing have been firmly established. The DMO worked collaboratively with the DMO right from 2016 that led to the first issuance in collaboration also with the Federal Ministry of Finance. Federal Ministry of Environment. Okay. So we're quite committed in working with the regulators to ensure fair practice, international standards, to ensure that the investors are protected and that the issuers issue along designated guidelines and framework for the trading of these instruments.
Are there lessons you're learning from Luxembourg?
Great lessons, great lessons. We have now exposure to international best practices. We have access to international investors. We have access to international platform visibility for our local issuers. And so we think that this is a very, very good MOU that we now see us entrench ourselves as indeed the leading stock exchange in Africa for the issuance of green bonds.
Going green is certainly the way to go. Thank you a great deal for your time. So I appreciate your moments. And of course, all of these insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Boston, it's back to you now.
Thank you. A very insightful conversation about going green there. Thank you so much, Temple Ashaju, with Jude Shemeka of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. From green bonds, how do we make Lagos roads a lot better and not about sustainable ease of doing business? And that's what we're talking about when we come back after the break.